down to this southern town last summer to show the folks a brand new way of life. But all you've shown the folks around here is trouble, and you've only added misery to their strife. Your concern is not to help the people, and I'll say again, no rich man often say. Your concern is just to bring discomfort, my friend, and your policy is just a little red. Now ain't I right?
Their policies are just a little red. Now ain't I right? What do we have here going on in American politics with our two parties? Anyone can see the simple reality that there is a new axis forming in this world, primarily comprised of Communist China at its head, the Russian Federation, along with it, being the most aggressive and most militaristic of them, along with Iran, North Korea, much of the putschist leaders in West Africa and the Sahel coup belt. You have the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Palestine, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Burmese junta. There's a whole large faction that's growing in this world that is united upon the premise of opposing Western liberalism. Now, Western liberalism gets a pretty bad rap these days. People think about the problems in their country. People think about valid criticisms of their leadership, right? And many people, unfortunately, are scared by the fox and are chased by the fox into the wolf's den. Many people on both sides of the aisle, because of their disillusionment about the state of society or about the opposing political faction, or even their own political faction, and the perceived ineffectuality of it, are driven into the said wolf's den. And on the right, in the Republican Party, that wolf's den is Russia. In the Democratic Party, occasionally it's Communist China, but most often it's Hamas and other Islamic terrorists. So let's hear what Marjorie Taylor Greene has to say about the war between tyranny and freedom that's going on in Ukraine.
Here's the issue. It doesn't matter who the president of the United States is. I have a major issue with billions and billions, and we're talking about tens and tens and billions of American hard-earned U.S. tax dollars being spent for another country's border for a proxy war with Russia, nuclear Russia, when this administration could care less about our own southern border. And here, let me make it very clear. He also brought something else.
First off, proxy wars. This rests on by calling it a proxy war and saying, oh, this proxy war, implying, again, that it is a proxy war, number one, and implying that proxy war is a negative thing, and any more so than any other war. It rests on a fundamentally anti-US Cold War philosophical basis, which has worked its way into, unfortunately, the understanding on the right, which in the Republican Party, they never bought into this sort of stuff in the past, that America was this fundamentally negative power in the world. You look at the context of the Cold War and all the proxy wars as they call them, that occurred during that time. One could clearly see that it was, collectively speaking, in an effort to fight against an opposing worldview, that being communism. It's quite clear that all those conflicts We're just part of one larger conflict, which we prevailed in. And yet, we're supposed to believe that fighting or supporting such conflicts is a bad thing and immoral. A very interesting turn of philosophy from the Republican Party, because this was never, certainly not in the era of Reagan, the way the Republican Party traditionally thought about this sort of thing. But I digress. Another thing is the narrative is that we're protecting Ukraine's border, but we can't protect our own. As if the invasion, as they call it, of asylum seekers, which is, by the way, is an issue. I've seen it myself, thousands per day. It's a big issue. But to say that is an invasion in the same regard as the Russian invasion of Ukraine is of course BS. Of course it's BS. It's nonsense. And so the narrative is that we won't protect our own border, but we'll protect Ukraine's.
And I have it on a paper plate because I have no idea if this thing's contaminated. This is a spent Russian shell that he left here with my staff and claimed that it was found near the nuclear facility in Ukraine. That was part of the see how bad this is, near a nuclear facility, send us $11.7 billion. Well, let me tell you about the fentanyl crisis in America.
So she has nothing to say, no commentary, nothing at all on that. She just rolls it off, rolls off her shoulder. She said, well, let me tell you about something that has absolutely nothing to do with the war. Yeah, because the fentanyl crisis totally has something to do with that. We shouldn't care about foreign policy if people are addicted to drugs in the United States. That's the narrative.
America. Let me show you where my voters come from. This right here is a map of Georgia's 14th district. This right here is where I'm from. These are the people that elected me to represent them here in the House of Representatives as their member of Congress. All of these people right here are not calling my office. As a matter of fact, they're not coming to my office begging me to send $11.7 billion to Ukraine. Do you want to know what they're calling my office about? They are calling my office about the inflation they cannot afford, the fact they cannot afford groceries at the grocery store. They are calling me about the gas prices. They are calling me about illegal aliens that are now landing in northwest Georgia that came across our southern border very, very far away in Texas, Arizona.
Right, so here's this Ukraine war. Let me then go and talk about these other completely unrelated issues, valid issues, but unrelated issues, and deflect. We can't spend this $11 billion on supporting freedom worldwide because people are dying of drug overdoses. We have the federal government shipping in migrants into our district, and we have inflation. Guys, what more can I say? I'm not going to spend any more time beating up on the lowest common denominator of the GOP. Let's instead take a look at the lowest common denominator of the Democrat Party. Let's see this.
From Georgia. Reserved. Reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is glaring hypocrisy when you
notice she had to change her joy and glee about being finally allowed up to the microphone, and she's so happy about it. And then she had to quickly change her little smile to, it's hypocrisy. She had a vibe.
You have Republicans on the other side of the aisle trying to create definitions and say Rashida wants to annihilate people when Max Miller himself went on TV and said we're turning Gaza into a parking lot and we want to annihilate Palestinians. Nobody condemned him on that side of the aisle.
Deflect, 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 deflect. Here's the reality. Neither of these two, or the lady behind us, not Ilhan Omar, not who represents urban Minneapolis, Rashida Tlaib, who represents Detroit, and I think Dearborn, Michigan, and then I believe that's Ayanna Pressley behind her, who represents part of Boston. None of those three have ever condemned Hamas as an organization. And if you were to have an extended conversation with any of them, you would realize actually that they don't really blame Hamas or Hezbollah really for what they're doing. In reality, they see it as them just validly responding to the stimuli that's around them, right? They will blame the Israelis for the radicalization of the Muslims in the region there, despite the fact that the second the Israelis or the Jewish people showed up there and began settling the area in 48, and the Israeli nation, the Jewish nation, became a state, they announced loudly in newspapers, and they may as well have said it through a bullhorn. We're going to eliminate the Jews. That's what they attempted to do in 48. That's what they attempted to do in the 1960s. And, by the way, also in 2023, on October 7th, was it? I believe it was October 7th. I'm maybe wrong on the exact date, but in October, when the Hamas members floated over the border of Israel and slaughtered over 1,000 civilians in an unprovoked attack. And people will say, well, this is provoked by X amount of years of repression and whatever. And, well, then you can go back and say, well, that's because of this. And well, then they go, that's because of that. And that's because of that. Are we going to be playing into this whole cycle of violence nonsense? Obviously, she is. So you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has not condemned Russia or their invasion of Ukraine in any real sense. The reality is, if she doesn't support Russia, she certainly opposes Ukraine. She certainly wouldn't mind them winning. Ilhan Omar, if she doesn't support Hamas, she certainly opposes Israel. And she wouldn't mind Hamas winning. So, and then you have the president himself, who he's clear-eyed on Russia and China, thank God. But with him having lifted the sanctions on Iran, that alone makes him soft on Iran. There's also the somewhat contradictory narrative, or at least political angle he's trying to take on this. On one hand, he's saying that, oh yeah, Israel has the right to defend itself, right? On the other hand, he said it's so horrible what's happening in Palestine. Well, make up your mind. Do they have the right to defend themselves, or don't they? The result of them doing military operations against Hamas in Gaza ends up with a lot of civilians. He said more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed. I'm surprised it's that few. there's almost 2 million people, or maybe even more than 2 million people in the Gaza Strip. And it's not a big place. It's only about, like, well, let's check it out. Let's see what its exact dimensions are. Real quick. So I'm not, messing with you. It's not a big place. And it's one of the most densely populated places on Earth. To be honest, when this war started, I figured that hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza would have been dead by now. See, look. This way? Okay. I'm trying to line up this 5-mile section. You see that? Yeah. Yeah, from certain areas, it's only like about 5 miles wide. And it's almost 2 million people in this area. It's one of the most densely populated places on Earth. So, that shows me that the Israelis are being extremely careful. Maybe even careful to the point where they're inhibiting the progress of the military operation. And so he makes a statement about Ramadan. And all of this that I'm highlighting... Oh, there's more. Okay. All of this, which is the majority of the address, relates to the war in Gaza. In the Ramadan address? It's not what the holiday of Ramadan is about. And then the next is accentuating the idea of widespread abuse towards Muslims in American society. Which is, when it happens, obviously it's a bad thing, but to devote an entire paragraph to it really brings more power to it. So you can see what's going on here. He's trying to play some weird middle ground between those who are supporting Israel and those who are in sort of the Ilhan Omar camp. The reality is, folks, you look at this, these kind of leaders make our country weak. Now, am I right?